Good morning. Good morning. Let's get started. Let me pray and we'll jump in. Lord God Almighty, thank you for this day. Thank you for October and the changes in season that it brings. Thank you for this group of men who want very much to honor you and follow your Son. Thank you for Solomon and his honesty. And thank you for the rabbis who decided to keep Ecclesiastes in the scriptures so that we can wrestle with these topics. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We're going to be processing the tail end of chapter 3 and jump into chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes today. Before we do, just a couple of announcements. One is, I don't know if all of you were here on Sunday, I think we announced that we have a next level Saturday night worship opportunity that's coming along. Saturday night has been around for many years, and it's always been this quiet opportunity for more people to get engaged. Services on Sunday mornings in this room tend to get packed between October and May. 9:30 in the sanctuary tends to fill up most days. So one of the places we have the opportunity to invite more people and have seats available and parking available is on Saturday night. So as one of the things we've done as part of our Beyond initiative, we've done some things in children's ministry and our fusion ministry, but we've also augmented our worship staff. Ryan has come on full time. So starting in February, the weekend of February 6th, 7th, whatever that first Saturday is, that's Super Bowl Sunday, we will launch our next level Saturday night worship service with an expanded worship team. Right now we usually have one vocalist with a guitar. We will start having a couple of guitars, a couple of vocalists, cello and keyboard, so a full music experience. We'll start having a Sparks experience because currently we don't have anything for children on Saturday nights. We'll also start having some sort of focused cafe experience because a lot of people like when they come to church to be able to enjoy our cafe because it's getting quite the reputation of being a great place to get food and coffee. We're also changing the time from 5:30 to 5:05, which means, it means what it means. It means that it's part of that weird group of services that we have. 5:05, 9:29, and 11:01, so they will all be essentially the same. And the vision is this, that some small groups, some families, some people will say, you know what, I want to make a shift to Saturday night worship. It's the same worship experience. And that might fit for some of you. Some of you guys work on Sundays. Some of you guys travel on Sundays. Kids have soccer and football and a whole bunch of other things. So Saturday night becomes a viable opportunity. We're doing a couple of preview services so people can come and see and taste what it will be like in February. And the first one is November 6th, which is coming up in just 3 weeks. That happens to be marathon weekend, where the Naperville Marathon will be going on, and they pretty much have us surrounded on Sunday morning. So it will be very, very, very extremely hard, terrible, rough, almost impossible to get here on Sunday morning. How bad will it be? You know what? It'll be so bad that I would just avoid it and come Saturday night. I hear that there will be a great preacher who's speaking that night. It also happens to be a Sleep Out Saturday, and I'll be sleeping out in the parking lot. I would invite all of you to try that experience. If you're not up for sleeping in the parking lot, that's fine. Give money. Give money to it. That's what we're trying to do, is raise money, and here's why. The fastest growing group of homeless people in this county, DuPage County, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, the fastest growing group of homeless people is veterans. That sucks. Whatever you think about the politics of war in Iraq and Iran and wherever we send people off to, when they come home and they fall through the cracks because of PTSD and a whole range of other things, that's not a good thing. The average age of a homeless person in DuPage County is 8 years old. So Sleep Out Saturday brings awareness to that, and it helps us with our partnership with some homeless ministries where we actually help people get off the streets, get a temporary housing, get some skills, get some counseling, get back on their feet. So one way or another, get involved with Sleep Out Saturday, even if you just sign up to donate, or if you want to come and serve soup that night in the soup kitchen. See Chris spearheads the whole thing. I'll be helping him from the pastoral side, but definitely plan to be here that Saturday night for worship. Our children's choir is singing. It's going to be a great worship experience. So anyway, that's my little commercial for the morning. So we're in chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes, and I don't know about you, but Ecclesiastes to me is a very relevant book. I think you're basically opening it up and you're reading the pages of Solomon's journal, Solomon's diary, and he's very honest in his questions. And what I like about Solomon is he doesn't have any limits to what he can experience. If it costs money, he can afford it. If it costs money, he can afford it. If it's to be gotten through human means, Solomon can get it. He can arrange for it. He can make it happen. So when he looks out on the world and says, I want to try these various things, he does it. And he comes back with what I think is an honest report. Sometimes he maybe overstates the case. I don't know. It depends on your perspective. But he forces you to have these good conversations about what is the meaning of life? What am I doing? What am I doing getting up in the morning, going to work, having kids? What am I doing? What's it all about? So last week we were talking about his statement that he uses a Hebrew teaching tool, which is called hyperbole, which means you overstate the case. And he says all motivation, all work, all production is basically motivated by envy. And we said, well, maybe that's overstating it. But having said that, fine. What in your life is not motivated by envy? Where is the fine line? And it's not 3 easy steps or 5 easy steps. There's a line that you can cross very easily when you look at other people and say, they look happy, why can't I be? Well, if they really are happy, then your assumption is pretty good. But if they're not, then maybe what they look like isn't something you should pursue. And as a pastor and as a coach who works with hundreds of people, I can tell you that whatever it looks like on the outside, chances are really good that behind the scenes it's not quite what it looks like. The happiness factor isn't always determined by the look on somebody's face. So here's another way of getting at that. Some of you may have heard this before. I don't know if you have or not. It's called the parable of the Mexican fisherman and the investment banker from America. Here it goes. An American investment banker was taking a much-needed vacation in a small coastal Mexican village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. The boat had several large fresh fish in it. The investment banker was impressed by the quality of the fish and asked the fisherman how long it took to catch them. The Mexican fisherman replied, only a little while. The banker then asked why he didn't stay out longer and catch more fish. The fisherman replied he had enough to support his family's immediate needs. The American then asked, but what do you do with the rest of your time? And the fisherman replied, I sleep late, I fish a little, I play with my children, I take siesta with my wife, I stroll into the village each evening where I sip wine and play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life, senor. The banker scoffed. I have an Ivy League MBA and I could help you. You could spend more time fishing and with the proceeds buy a bigger boat. And with the proceeds from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats until eventually you would have a whole fleet of fishing boats. Instead of selling your catch to the middleman, you could sell directly to the processor, eventually opening your own cannery. You can control the product, processing, and distribution. Then he added, of course, you would need to leave this small coastal fishing village and move to Mexico City, where you would run your growing enterprise. The fisherman asked, but senor, how long will this take? To which the American replied, 15, 20 years. But what then? Asked the Mexican. The American laughed and said, that's the best part. When the time is right, you would announce an IPO and sell your company stock to the public and become very rich. You would make millions. Millions, senor. Then what? To which the investment banker replied, then you would retire. You could move to a small coastal fishing village where you would sleep late, fish a little, play with your kids, take siesta with your wife, stroll to the village in the evenings where you could sip wine and play guitar with your amigos. And that's why Solomon is, I think, profound to read, because it's not simple. The parable gets at something that is the deeper question, the why. Why do you do what you do? If you do it for the motive of the investment banker to just build more so you can have more zeros after your name, that's an empty why. On the other hand, I very quickly can dissect this parable like that and say, yeah, but you're employing a whole bunch of other amigos, and you're employing a bunch of people in the boat building industry, and you're employing people in the power industry, and you're building an infrastructure, and you're building an economy which lifts all boats. That's the takeaway, and we can dissect that. But we can't do that too quickly, because there are a lot of us who, when push comes to shove, are simply building more to build more. So it begs the question, in your life, in my life, where's the line? And it's not the same for everybody. There are people who absolutely, because they have God-given gifts to build a business and can thrive doing it, and spend time with their amigos and play guitar and sip wine and do it while they're building an enterprise, they ought to be doing that, because that's the gift that God gave them. There are other people for whom they should run from that scenario because it will steal their soul. And that's what I think is profound about Solomon, is it forces us all to ask the question, and it won't be the same answer for everyone. And then Solomon gets into this reflection, which I think is pretty profound in chapter 3. He says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If they fall down, they can help each other up. But pity those who fall and have no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can 1 keep warm alone? Though 1 may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily or quickly broken. And Solomon's moving into a place where he's admitting and realizing, you know what, I've had it all, but I've done it all by myself. To build all these wonderful things and to have money and wealth and material goods and just hoard it to yourself is a pretty empty thing to do. And he's recognizing, you know what, maybe some friends along the way for the journey would change everything. And so he gets into this wonderful discussion of what friendship looks like. Let's unpack that a little bit. His perspective is that 2 are better than 1, and it's not a simple math problem. He's saying that there's an investment that you can make in another human being or in other human beings that returns something to you, that friendship is worth the effort, that having people in your life that you can be close to is definitely life better lived than doing it on your own. And he really lays out 3 different kinds of friends. One of them is what I call the 3 a.m. 9/11 friend, the 911, the friend that you can call, the proverbial guy that you can call when all you know what hits the fan, and you call him and say, Roger, I need your help. Matt, I need your help. And they will come, no questions asked. We all need somebody like that. So do a quick inventory. Do you have somebody like that in your life? If you do, you know how important it is. If you don't, put it in your to-do list now to figure out who that person is, because you need to be that for someone else. That's part of what Jesus calls us to do. Second kind of friend is what I call the know and be known friend. This is someone who knows you at your worst, and they're still your friend. Those are hard to find. But maybe what's harder to find is someone who knows you at your best, and they're still your friend. Think about it. When you've done something really good, you get that new client, and you're like, yes, this is great. Or my kid won the all-star game, or my team won this, or my investment won that, or I had a great vacation, and they come back and tell you, and they're like, oh yeah? Well, let me tell you about and they do the one-upsmanship because they can't stand to be in the presence of somebody who's doing really well. We need friends who can hang with us at our worst and at our best, and that's not easy to find. It's not easy to find. Talk to people who have made it, who've done something in life, and they start to increase in their wealth, and their friends don't increase at the same pace. And a lot of those people will tell you, I don't have those same friends anymore because things shifted and it got weird. So we need friends who can know and be known, who we can love and be loved by, serve and serve with, encourage and be encouraged by. And then we need somebody, what I call an I've got your six. That's a military expression. On a clock, 12 is in front of you, 6 is behind you. This is somebody who's got your back. And that means they are your friend when you're not around. And so when you're not around and they're in a circle of people and that group of people starts talking about you, your friend doesn't join in the crap. Your friend says, wait a second, have you told this to Bob? Oh, you haven't shared it with Bob, but you're sharing with me. No, you go talk to Bob. Until then, talk to the hand, because I'm not listening to your stuff about so-and-so. And Solomon is saying doing life with those 3 kinds of friends is so much better than doing it alone. So Solomon has that perspective, and I think that perspective is really good. Jesus takes it one step further. First of all, Jesus says you can't look at people's worldly resume. Jesus regularly got accused of hanging out with sinners, people of questionable repute, people who other people said, you know, you probably shouldn't be hanging out with that guy. And those were precisely the people that Jesus hung out with. Because you can't always judge a book by its cover. You can't judge a book by just everything that person has done in the past. And yes, we do have to be careful, but Jesus would say, you know, don't just go by what people say. Don't go by Naperville standards of what friendship should look like. I'm not always sure that that's accurate. And then he says, Jesus would say in John, true friends are obedient to God. I mean, if you're going to have a friend that's going to get close enough to know you at your best and your worst, they better be on the same mission as you. Because otherwise your risk tolerance, your pacing, your endurance is going to be different than theirs. You're going to be out of sync. I can be friends with a lot of people, but my closest friends have to be people that know and understand that I'm running with Jesus. And that if Jesus calls me to go a certain direction, that's the direction I'm going. And they need to understand that. Jesus would say, true friends stay friends even when there's betrayal. If Judas had come to Jesus and said, you know what, I really blew it, what do you think Jesus would have said? But we know what he would have said because Peter did essentially the same thing. Peter had credible eyewitness testimony to challenge the assumptions that were being made in the court. And Peter was just outside the door of the courtroom when Jesus is on trial. Peter could have walked in there and said, hey, wait a minute, I am a follower, and I can tell you what you're saying is not true. He's not preaching sedition against Rome, which is what you're charging him with. But Peter didn't. Instead, what did Peter do? He denied him 3 times. What did Jesus do? He goes and meets him on the beach and has breakfast with him and says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Then get back in the game. So Jesus says, if you're a true friend, you'll be a friend even when most people would say back out. And then Jesus would say true friends show it by laying down their life. That 9/11 friend, how far will they get to the place where if your life is on the line? And I know this, the place that I experienced this the most, if you've ever been in the military, you know that's a place where you see that pretty quickly, that you get in situations where, you know, if things go bad, everyone's life is at stake, and you kind of know who's around you. And you talk to people who've been in the military, and they will tell you, yeah, I didn't do this for the flag and mother country, and yeah, all that's great. I did this for the guys that are right next to me in the foxhole, or I did this for the guys that are right next to me on deck, or I have a friend that I scuba dive with, and he's a guy that I know, if something happens to me at 100 feet down, he's going to do everything in his power to help bring me back alive. And I'm going to do the same thing for him. And I know that. And we've been underwater a couple hundred times together. And Jesus would say that's true friendship. So Solomon, in this case, I think, has a pretty good mindset of what friendship is. And Jesus says, let's take it even one step further. So what I'd like you to do is just take a couple minutes at your table and just answer this question. What if someone asked you, what is true friendship? What would you say is the definition of true friendship for you? How would you define it? How would you coach a younger person in what true friendship really means? Go ahead and share that at your table. All right. Let's jump back into Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And I realize that friendship is a topic that you could talk about longer than 10 minutes. But hopefully this discussion and some of these passages from Solomon will push you to reflect on your relationships. It's worth the investment to find friends. It's worth the investment to be a friend. It makes life better in all the situations in which that will matter. And Solomon should know he's got access to as many people as he wants. But if I'm reading him right, there's a little hint here that he's saying, maybe I don't have the close relationships that I need. Maybe in my kingship, I've managed to do everything that I've wanted to do, but I don't have these close relationships. At least that's what it seems to me. So I challenge you all to think about that. Yeah, Mike.
Part of being a friend is being somebody of equal abilities or circumstances or things. Solomon has no equal in this time. He's the richest, most powerful person in the area. And for some, in the back of his mind, he's got to always have, well, are they my friend because of this, or because they have to be, or because I'm the king? How can you have an equal when you're that?
Which Mike raises a great point, that he said friendship assumes a certain equality. And I would say, yes, it's generally easier when there's equality, but is that always the case? But that's where the other question about envy comes in. Because if I think I have to be equal with my friends, what does that say about me? But to Mike's point, Solomon does have a tough time. How does he know who really is his friend if he can write a check for everything? And are they just leeches? And he's going to get into that in the next chapter about when you have money, be careful because it will attract people. So it is this really tough thing. There's not 5 easy steps to find friendship. There are certain tests. And I think one of them is what happens when push comes to shove. What happens when you are at your worst? What happens when you are at your best? What happens when there is betrayal? It's living through those seasons in which we get to see that person, that one there, that's a true friend. That's a true friend. But it's worth, pursuing. But the other side of that is that in Naperville, many of us, we have made it. We've made it to a certain height in our profession. So how do you know who your friends are if you make more than they do, if you have more than they do? And that ends up nesting here in this church. Let me just give you a couple of the ways. One, I've heard people say, I don't know if I want to be in a small group with them because they rotate the hosting of the group meeting. And I don't want those people to come to my house because my house isn't quite what their house is. That's an interesting thing. They're assuming that the other group of people will find something wrong with their house because it's a little bit smaller. Or vice versa. I've had people say, I don't know if I want to host because I don't want to make people feel bad because my house is really big and really nice. Okay, well, what's that about then? If you got this great big house, but you're afraid it'll offend people to invite them in? Let's see, maybe we should scratch our heads on that one. What would Solomon, all these things, that's what I mean. There's not a 3 easy steps to figure out if you're envious or not. It gets layered in All these little nuanced questions, just layered in. Another one. I know that when we speak about money, I love talking about money because it's the closest thing you can get to push on a person's heart. And when I speak about money, I know that I could be talking to a CEO who's making $500,000 a year and has millions of dollars in equity and is doing really well. And on the other end of the pew, there's a single mom with a couple of kids who's struggling on an administrative salary of $35,000 a year. And maybe a few pews back, there's a retired person who's living on a fixed income. And a few pews over, there's a guy who just got the promotion to be sales manager and really thriving. And then a few pews over, there's a person who just started a new business and they're doing well, but boy, they're watching every single nickel. And I'm speaking to that whole group and a whole mixture of people in between. And I know invariably when I speak about wealth, there's going to be somebody who says, well, that guy obviously made his wealth by, well, you know how he made it. I mean, to get that kind of wealth, obviously he had to cut some corners. And then there's the guy who's got the wealth looking over there going, well, if you just get busy, I mean, come on. Welfare is for all you suck-ups who can't get a job and don't want to get out of bed in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And we put boxes and labels around people. So this stuff is real and it's live and it percolates around our congregation. I have a client who, he's not my client in the last few years, but he was for a few years and still friends with him. And he makes a lot of money, stock market. And he said, Glenn, there hasn't been a year in the last 25 years that I haven't made over $1 million a year. And I know that to be true. And there are people who make a lot more than that. And he's just really good at it. He said, that's what I'm good at. I know how to make money when the market's going up or the market's going down. He's good at that. And he's got a stock firm that does well. But he also, for the last 12, 15 years at least, has given away 70% of his income. I know that because I've seen it. And I say that to people and they say, oh yeah, real easy for him. He's making $1 million. I could give away 70% of my income if I was making $1 million. I said, okay, picture this. You take out a check and you write 7, comma, 0, 0, 0, comma, 0, 0. You could really write that check out, $700,000. Well, I don't, somewhere close to that I could. And then they assume, and my friend would say, I don't find a nice fit in churches because churches don't know what to do with me. Because people assume I must be doing something shady. And he gets a new Lexus or a new Mercedes just about every other year because one of his clients is a car dealer. And he said, if I show up at my clients in a Chevy, they immediately assume that I don't know what I'm doing and I lose my clients. He said, I could care less about these cars. I probably spend less on my cars than most people do on their American or their Honda because I have a client who gets me the best deal on. He said, I could care less about that stuff. And one day he said to me, Glenn, I'm thinking about, selling all this and going into ministry. I said, you sit on 6 boards of 6 different mission organizations. You donate hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've built up a business in which many people are thriving. You do it ethically and with integrity. And you're going to do this because there's a handful of people that don't understand you? Crap. That's spiritual malpractice. That's nonsense. I said, you need to worry about an audience of one. What does God think? And so I've also been in Guatemala on a dump where people make maybe $100 a year. And they fight and they scrap and there's greed and there's hierarchy. So sin scales up and scales down. Envy scales up and scales down. It's not an easy 3-point litmus test, but it ripples through all these questions. And that's why I think Solomon is profound here in the way he lays these out and just says, what do you think about friendship? What do you think about envy? So let's pick up the story in chapter 4. Solomon says, again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed. They've no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive, but better than both is one who has never been born, who has not seen evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So we've talked about all that. He then says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil. So he's using another Hebrew teaching tool. You don't want to be a fool who wastes his life. You also don't want to be somebody who chases it so hard that you've got so much that you lose your peace over it. Better to have this much with peace than this much without peace. So you don't want to be a fool, and you don't want to be a guy who has too much. Somewhere you got to find the right path. And then there was a man all alone. He had neither son or brother. And then he talks about all the friendship which we just went through. And then he gets into this nice little deep self-reflection in verse 13. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king. Wonder who he's talking about there. Who no longer knows how to heed a warning. That's something that you can only say after you've lived a little bit of life. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. That certainly can't be Solomon, because he's born into wealth. He's reflecting on his dad. His father David was born as a shepherd boy. He says, I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. That's him. There was no end to all the people who were before him. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. He's saying, I'm not quite as good as my father David, who was born in poverty but ascended to the kingship. People have now followed me, but I'm questioning why they're following me. And my successor, what will he do? So when you lay your head on the pillow and these questions come to you, I think it's profound to ask, what am I doing this for? And that's why I say the gospel is bigger than just getting saved and going to heaven. That's a good part of it. But the gospel is a big set of ideas that says life has to have some kind of meaning. And that even good things, without the right why underneath, can become thin and like a thin tissue and not really give you the joy and satisfaction that they can if you have a deeper purpose and a deeper why. That's why Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. And Solomon obviously has had some of the best, but he's reflecting and saying, I don't know, how will people speak my name? What will they say? And so he's wrestling with that, and I think it's profound for all of us to wrestle with it. Let's move into chapter 5 real quickly, spend a little bit of time in the first few verses in our last 10, 12 minutes or so. Chapter 5, Solomon then rolls around from his deep self-reflection, and he says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. So now he's talking about, all right, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the temple. I'm going to go to worship. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your words or with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, you're on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools, so fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not protest to the temple messenger. My vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at you? Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. If you see the poor oppressed in a district, injustice and rights denied, don't be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are other things, others higher still. They increase from the land. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. I'll explain what that means in a minute. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. This is what I've observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. So let's unpack that a little bit. He says, first, when you go to the temple, pay attention, be self-aware. It's where he says, watch your steps on your path. That's a Hebrew way of saying, forget about everybody else. You pay attention to you. What's your mind, heart, and soul saying as you approach God in worship? And he says, listen first. Fools speak first when they're in the presence of God. A great Hebrew prophet, a theologian by the name of Abraham Joshua Heschel said, all good theology begins in silence. Shut up. Be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. It's the King of the universe. A little quiet is a good thing. Watch your words because you're in the presence of someone who will hold you accountable. Gain perspective. Try to see things through the eyes, through the heart of God. Don't try to gain God's favor by big plans, great promises, and big dreams because he'll hold you accountable. I love when I do weddings. In the charge at the beginning of the wedding, I say, be careful that you know that your words you speak, the vows you speak, are being spoken before a holy God who will hold you accountable for the vows that you speak. And some people maybe think that's just a religious thing that I read out of a book. No, I really think that God will say, so I remember this day when you stood in front of an altar and you said, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, how'd you do? So Solomon is talking about when you then turn from life's pursuits and you go to God, that's a great place to stop being a fool. That's a great place to stop being a fool, stop promising, and just go and be silent and consider things from the perspective of the King of the universe. And it's a profound thing, so let's get ahead of that. He says, the wise person listens. Worship is the submission of all our nature to God. It is the quickening of conscience by his holiness, the nourishment of the mind by his truth, the purifying of the imagination by his beauty, the opening of the heart to his love, the submission of will to his purpose, and all this gathered up in adoration is the greatest human expression of which we are capable. That's what worship really is. When you ponder who God is and God's majesty, God's power, God's mercy, God's justice, God's complexity, when you really ponder that, you are brought silent. You know, Moses was brought to the bush and he was told to take off his shoes. And I realized after a while that what the bush was saying was, it's not just the ground around the bush that was holy. Everywhere Moses walked is holy. This is God's earth. Take off your shoes all the time because you're in the presence of a holy God. And he boils it down to this, that we make commitments in life. Commitment means staying loyal to what you said you were going to do long after the mood you said it in has left you. That's hard. And Solomon is offering some words of wisdom that all of these things in life, they can pull us off of some basic commitments. And if we've made commitments before God, those are not things to be taken lightly. You can't just go back to the temple and tell the clerk, by the way, erase that one. Because God remembers. So be very careful what you promise. I love when I'm in meetings with clients or with people, and one of my favorite pet peeves is to hear someone say, well, I'm just saying. There's no such thing as just saying. We are doing things with words. Every time you say something, you are trying to accomplish something. You're either making a request, making a declaration, making a promise, making a commitment, or making an observation. And by the doing of that, you are trying to generate some response from someone else. There's no such thing as just saying. And so when you commit, when you say I will, or I can, or I want to, or I won't, you are making commitments. You are sharing a piece of your being. And to not fulfill that leaves a piece of your being sort of floundering. And Solomon says that's the ultimate fragmentation. So our mission statement, vision statement here says we want to reach and transform spiritually distracted people. And I remember some conversations I had with people early on. They said, that seems a little too light. Let's call it sin. All right. What do you mean by sin? Anything that takes your eyes off of God. That sounds like distraction to me. Distraction is anything that pulls you away from these basic life commitments that you've made to God or to others in the presence of God. And Solomon is saying that's something to be taken very seriously, because if you don't, it will fragment your soul. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And this is a starting place, those commitments that you make before God. Let's unpack a couple other things. Then he goes into this discussion of justice and oppression, and he says a few things. Don't be shocked by corruption in high places. I wonder how Solomon can say that. You think maybe he's seen some? He's got hundreds of concubines and wives because he's made political deals with all of Israel's enemies, some of them not in concert with the commitments he's made to God to keep Israel holy and pure. And gradually, Solomon goes from being the wisest guy in the world to a guy who's so wise he can't see his nose in front of his face. And so he allows all these other syncretistic religions to creep in, and the temple becomes impure, and Solomon dies and the kingdom is split. So I think Solomon is speaking from wisdom. Don't be shocked that many levels and layers of government make it inevitable that corruption will creep in. And then that last part about a king and a farmland, what he's essentially saying is, but let's not become anarchists, because a little bit of corruption in a government at least keeps some stability, and you're better off with some corruption and stability than instability and total corruption, or instability and total chaos and no government. That's really what he's saying. And if you doubt his wise words there, come with me to Guatemala or to Honduras, because you will see lots of corruption, very little stability, and you will see what it does to an economy. Is there corruption in the United States at several levels? I grew up in Chicago, come on. But is anyone here worried that during the next presidential campaign, if the wrong guy gets elected, are you worried about a military coup? Is there anyone here worried that the Joint Chiefs of Staff will somehow get together and say, okay, we're marching on Washington to take over? I don't worry about that. There will be a peaceful transition, and we can all keep arguing about politics, but there will be a peaceful transition. Roads get built, planes fly, clocks tick, electricity goes. Go to where my daughter lives, and she just texted me this morning and said, Dad, we've been without power for 4 days. Can you imagine being without power in Naperville for longer than about 5 minutes? Like, what? Without power, I elected you. Get busy. So that's what Solomon's saying. Let me just offer this last insight on his perspective on wealth, and then I'll show you a clip and you can think about that and we'll pray and head out. Solomon's perspective on wealth is pretty wise. He says this: wealth is addictive and unsatisfying. He's not saying money is bad. He's saying be careful, because it's addictive and unsatisfying. Wealth attracts human leeches. You don't know who's close to you because they're really your friend or because they want to hang out with you because you got stuff. Wealth taken out of circulation is nothing but an eyesore. He's picturing wealthy people taking their gold, stockpiling it on the table, and going, ah, look at that, isn't it beautiful? It's not doing anything, it's not building anything, it's not out there in production. Wealth produces worry and insomnia. I was watching a special on the Koch brothers, and I don't dislike the guys. They have a ton of money, but they're a little bit over the hill. They're thinking about their legacy. And I'm listening to this conversation about how they're worried about the country that they're going to leave. And like, really? That's what you're worried about? You're sitting on top of billions, and I heard a little bit of what Solomon's talking about edging into their conversations. I hear it in people who have lots of stuff, and they're wondering, what happens when I'm not around to dust off my piles of gold? Wealth makes hoarders of us all. Just check your basement and your garage. Wealth is not a good foundation for happiness because it can be easily lost, and wealth is nothing in the face of death. Is he wrong about any of those? And he's not saying, here's the test. You can make this much, but not this much. He's saying, watch these things, because these things can be the trap, and they catch all of us at slightly different places in our lives with slightly different circumstances. So I leave you with this question. Why do you do what you do? Wealth is not bad. Production is not bad. Work is not bad. But for the wrong reasons, it can kill you. Doing it alone, without people that really are friends, it's an empty way to go. Underneath all of that, Jesus walks in and says, I have come that you might have life and have it with more abundance. That following Jesus can make all your friendships, all your relationships change. They can bring you into a kingdom that's worth building. They can give you a strength that no matter if the stock market crashes, yes, it'll be a bad day, but you will survive, and you will have friends, and you will have meaning, and you will have purpose. Because all this stuff can go away just like that. But the kingdom of God cannot be shaken. It is a kingdom that will never be shaken. And Jesus is the only rightful king of the only kingdom that matters. And if that is our focus, all of these other things find their rightful place, and we can live a life at which the end of which we can say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into my rest. Let's pray. Lord God Almighty, thank you for this day. Thanks for Solomon and his questions, his reflections, sometimes his cynicism. Lord, we thank you that your Son takes us even further than Solomon, takes us into the deep places of the heart and calls us to live for eternity, calls us to live for something bigger than us, something deeper, something more profound, something that lasts beyond any economy, beyond any possession, beyond any friendship. You are a true friend, and I thank you for that. Thank you for these men who get up early on Wednesday mornings to wrestle with the deep things of life. Give them a taste of that life abundant today. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Thanks, guys.